Alright, ladies and gentlemen, this is your teacher, Mr. Hess. I'm sorry that I'm not there with y'all this week. So just kind of a recap of what's going on this week. Today, you guys are going to get a review over GDP and employment and unemployment. Tomorrow, you guys are going to get a preview about the upcoming assignment with the aggregate model, the ADAS model. And then Thursday and Friday, I really need y'all to have your textbooks with y'all both of those days, and or your personal computers. You're going to be working on your homework as well as making sure that you study for and take your Unit 3 Part 1 exam. And if you're wanting to do your Unit 2 redo, taking care of that as well. Just a reminder, on the front page of my website, whenever you scroll down past the bell schedule, is the link for the Unit 3 exam review. So when you go on there, the first link that you have, the Unit 3 practice problems, student copy, when you open that up, alright, it's a huge thing of practice questions from released exams. Alright, I've got 80 questions on there. Very good resource. I'd make sure that you go through and check that out. The second thing I've got for you is the GDP FRQ review. Okay, when you click on that, alright, it's going to have a set of 5 questions very similar to the questions that we did from the 2007 free response question in class. Alright, the first page has the questions on there and a kind of a reminder of how it works. You know, there's 2 parts to each of these questions. You're going to start by telling me whether or not the thing's counted or not, explain why, and please make sure that you count at the very end, make sure that you include the definition of GDP. Alright, GDP counts all final goods and services produced within a nation in a given year's time. Alright, so you go through that. On the next pages, it's got an explanation, looking at why. I want you to try solving this on your own first, then go ahead and go in and take a look at the answers. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and go through the lesson with y'all. After that, I'm going to go to Schoology and kind of show you a reminder of how the test format looks. Alright, so go ahead, if you don't have out already, get the GDP notes packet out up on your desk. Alright, now I've got this set up. There's page numbers at the bottom center of each of the slides. Okay, and there's space on the side of each slide in case you need to add any notes to it. But I'm going to start by going over Module 11 with y'all. Module 11 is exploring GDP, gross domestic product. Now, some of the ideas I'm going to go over with y'all were also part of Module 10, which also talks about GDP. But we looked at Chapter 10, Module 10 last unit when we were looking at the circular flow model. So we're just going to focus specifically on GDP right here. Okay, so let's go and take a look at the second slide together. Alright, start with the definition of GDP, and you've heard this from me several times already, but GDP is the market value of all final goods and services that are produced within a nation in a given year's time. The key word on this slide right here is final. Alright, so what I need you to do is go through, and I would circle, highlight, underline the word final on there. Make sure that you are familiar. Okay, we're talking about final goods. Okay, final goods and services, and we're talking about being produced within a nation's borders. Alright, so if we're talking about US GDP, it's got to be within our borders. If it's not within our borders, that counts for something else that we talked about called GNP, or gross national product. Okay, so GDP is going to measure all aggregate spending, income, and output. Alright, so we're talking about things that are made within a given year. Alright, so let's go and take a look at the next slide. So as far as counted or not counted goes, alright, we already have this with the definition, but GDP counts all final domestic production for which there's a market transaction. Alright, I would put down on the side of your slide, when we're talking about a market transaction, we mean that there is an exchange of money, but specifically there's an exchange of money that's being kept with tax purposes. Okay, so this is going to get rid of used and intermediate goods because we don't want to double count them. If we double count them, we talked about inflation before. This would cause inflation to increase at a faster rate than the economy could necessarily keep up with. Okay, we're also not going to count non-market production. And inside the notes in class that we looked at, we looked at non-market production being anything as, volunteering your time, working for your parents at home and them not paying you for it, working in a family business, any activity you're doing that there's no transaction taking place, bartering with somebody else, exchanging, your goods and services in exchange for one of theirs. You're not doing any monetary exchange. And then last but not least, we said underground or black market activity is not counted. Now, when we're talking about this category, it doesn't specifically mean things that are illegal necessarily. It just means things that are not being reported to the IRS, which I guess technically, yes, we would be speaking, in terms of illegal things, but it doesn't necessarily mean, things like drugs all the time. This could include, you're working for a family friend and they pay you under the table for the work that you had provided. Okay? So, when we're looking at that, that's what you want to kind of keep in mind. All right, if you go ahead and flip it over to the next slide, all right, slide 4, we're going to take a look at a couple of examples. All right, so we're going to kind of go through this, and I'm going to go over it with you, but I want you to think about whether or not the following would be counted in U.S. GDP and why. All right, so the first one we have is new U.S. manufactured Goodyear tires that are sold to the Ford Motor Company. And the second one, we've got new U.S. manufactured Goodyear tires sold directly to me, Mr. Hess. For the third one, we've got child care services that are being provided by my sister for her neighbor's kid. And for the last one, we've got a new Tundra pickup truck manufactured in Dallas, Texas by the Japanese firm Toyota. All right, so inside of your head, I want you to kind of already be formatting, or formulating what do you think it's going to go and where it's going to go. So if we take a look at the first one, for example, those tires that are sold to Ford Motor Corporation, these are not going to count. All right, we said that these are intermediate goods, and intermediate goods, remember, are anything we need to make a final product. And so when Ford buys those tires, they're going to take the tires and put it on the vehicles that they're ultimately going to sell. All right? Now that's different than the second example I gave you, which is where those tires are sold to me. Now if I buy those tires like I had to buy the new truck tires last semester, okay, that's the final product. Because whenever you buy the tires yourself, the idea is that you're taking that, you're the final consumer, you're going to use it for your own personal needs. When we look at the child care services provided by my little sister for her neighbor's kid, that would not be counted. Okay, we talked about underground or black market, any sort of activities that are not being reported. Now, if my sister ran a daycare center and she, filed taxes with the IRS, then yes, absolutely would be counted as payment for her service provided. But typically speaking, when we're talking about daycare that's, being provided by the average person, we're speaking in terms of money that's being exchanged under the table. And then the last one, the Toyota Tundra, even though this is a Japanese company, remember we said any goods that are made inside our nation's borders within that year's time will count towards U.S. GDP. So this will count towards our GDP. This would count towards Japan's GNP, their gross national product. Okay? So the next couple of slides, I've got a recap of what all the different terms are, what they mean. We're going to first start on slide 6 with an overview of what aggregate spending is. And I'm going to go ahead and put a big star right here. I would circle this slide, underline it, highlight it, leave yourself a mark. I know I talked to you about it before. This is one of the most important formulas that we're going to end up seeing in this course. All right? GDP is equal to C plus IG plus G plus XN, where C is our consumption, IG is gross private investment by businesses, G is the amount of spending done by the government, and XN is our exports minus our imports, or our net exports. Okay? So, make sure that you remember this formula. We had a warm-up question last week where I had asked you to come up with GDP, and they even threw in some extra information you did not need. They threw taxes on there and they threw depreciation just to try to throw you off. Okay? And that was an actual question from one of the released AP exams. So please make sure that you're paying attention to the question in its entirety. All right? So let's take a look at the next slide. When I talk about consumption, this is talking about almost any type of consumer spending. All right, so this is when we buy durable goods. These are things that are meant to last for a long time. Cars, appliances, vehicles, all right, and non-durable goods, food and clothing. Now, that's not to say that food and clothing is not going to last for a while, but typically speaking, we hope to get more mileage out of our major purchases than we do from our everyday types of things that we buy. Okay? Consumer spending also includes services that we purchase. I send my kids to daycare every month, or if you're in college next year, all those different things you pay for, your electric bill, your cable bill. And we talked about this before, and I've got it noted for you. You might pay attention on that bottom bullet. Consumer spending is by far the largest part of GDP. We put the estimate someplace around 67%, roughly 2/3 of all spending in our country comes from us as consumers. Okay? And again, it's almost every category. We said that it does not include houses. All right, whenever you purchase a new home, even if it was brand new built, that does not count as consumption under GDP. All right? Instead, we see that under IG, gross private investment. All right, so looking at slide 8, gross private investment is spending in order to increase future output or productivity. Okay, on the side of this slide, I want you to write down capital. I know I've got that as the first sub-bullet, but write down capital really big. Okay, this right here, we are talking about physical capital. Physical capital. Physical capital, if you'll remember back to the beginning of the course, physical capital, we're talking about our tools, our factories, our machinery, all the various things that companies need in order to continue to grow. All right, so if, let's imagine I'm a major corporation and I invest money in the assembly line process for making my goods. Okay, that's going to make me a more efficient company, and it's going to ultimately increase my level of productivity and, hopefully in turn increase my level of profit. This also includes new construction. And new construction means within our physical capital things like new buildings for our office spaces, but it also includes houses built for consumers. Okay? You may see this depending on which version of the exam that you end up taking, but one thing to know is that it also includes change in unsold inventories, which means if a company makes a product and it does not sell that particular year, it still counts towards that year's GDP. Okay? So I used the example in class with a few of my classes of, let's say that Ford Motor Company made 40,000 Mustangs in 2017. Okay? And let's say that they sold 38,000 of those. So there was 2,000 left over that did not sell this year. Now, pretend that they sell immediately next year. Right when they've got the start of the year closeout sales, they're trying to get rid of old inventory. These 2,000 units sell pretty quickly. It would still count towards U.S. GDP for this current year, for the 2017 year. Okay? And it would count under gross private investment because it's unsold inventory. If we think back, GDP we said, and I know I've said this a lot, but GDP counts all final goods and services produced within a nation in a given year's time. All right? So looking at slide 9, looking at government spending, this is any type of government spending except for transfer payments. All right? Whenever we talk about transfer payments, we're talking about money that is going from the government to somebody else to be used down the road. All right? And so this will include, all types of welfare. And we've had the discussion about welfare in class before, but keep in mind, when we're talking about welfare, welfare is so much more than things like CHIP, Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, Social Security. All right? When we're talking about these forms of welfare, this also includes financial aids for college students. All right? So whenever we're speaking of transfer payments, this does not count because ultimately, for example, let's say you get grant money for college next year. That grant money is coming from the government to you, and then you're going to end up taking it and spending it at the university of your choosing. All right. Now, if they counted it, when it came to you and then counted it again when you spent it, well, now we've got double counting. All right. So transfer payments, we want to make sure that we're careful so that way we can avoid double counting. All right. So the next slide that I want us to go ahead and take a look at. Next slide I want us to take a look at is our net exports. Sorry about that technology issue. When we're looking at net exports, we are talking about our exports minus our imports. Okay? Exports we've talked about when we did the foreign exchange model. Exports are an outflow of goods, but an inflow of money. Imports are an inflow of new goods, but it's an outflow of money. And in the United States, we've pretty much had a trade deficit, meaning we've had a negative net exports almost every single year running since World War II. All right? We talked about it before. It's not necessarily a bad thing for us because our consumer spending, our government spending, and our level of investments far outweigh what our country loses monetarily with exports each year. But it ends up working itself out. We're going to look at this a whole lot more later when we look at comparative and absolute advantage. But what I need you to understand for right now is that net exports, okay, is the end result of what we sell to other countries and we subtract what we buy from them. All right, so money in versus money out. Now, real quickly, I'm going to just kind of breeze through a second model that your textbook talks about called the aggregate income approach. This is not really a focus on the AP exam. However, I do want to make this connection because it'll relate some of the concepts that we talked about back in Unit 1 and kind of help them come around full circle. Okay? When we look at the aggregate income model, this is looking at the 4 factors of production. Okay? 4 factors of production we said are the 4 types of resources. So we're looking at land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. All right? So whenever we're looking at land, we're measuring for the income approach rent, because rent is the payment for land. All right? For labor, the payment for labor is wages. The payment for capital, the payment for our investments, is interest. And the payment that the entrepreneur makes for their new products, that's ultimately the economic profit. Okay? And so rent, this is the income received by households and the businesses that supply property resources. So monthly rent, office spaces, things like that. Wages is very self-explanatory. You do a job, you get paid for it. Wages are your paycheck. Okay? Now, there are several questions that will appear on your unit exam, again, depending on the version you get, looking at wages. And I know this is kind of a basic concept, but it's going to tie into a later concept we're going to build into in the second part of Unit 3, looking at disposable income, okay, or the take-home pay. All right, so, whenever you have your job, you get your gross pay, which is kind of what you could have made, and then you get your net pay, which is after the government is done taking their taxes from you. All right, net income, disposable income are the same thing, and we're going to talk about that more. All right, but the wages that you bring home, that's your disposable income, your net income. All right, interest is any kind of money paid by private businesses to the supplier of money capital. So this will include any kind of saving deposits and finance something called CDs, which are certificates of deposits, and corporate bonds. Okay, we're going to come back and talk a whole lot more about bonds when we get to Unit 5 and we look at the money market. Okay, so just maybe leave yourself a note. We will come back to this later. Don't worry, we'll talk about bonds and securities more than you could probably care once we get to Unit 5. All right, last but not least, we've got our profits. All right, in profits, we're talking about proprietor's income. So this right here is the net income of the sole proprietor. A sole proprietor is kind of like a mom and pop operation, a small locally owned business, the money that they make, or a partnership or any other kind of business. It also would include corporate profits, all right, earnings owned by the owners of that corporation. Okay, so this brings us to slide 16, all right. Now, slide 16, one thing I need to make sure that you know, and that's the difference between nominal versus real GDP. By this point, I've talked about with y'all a couple of times, nominal interest rate versus real interest rate. And the big thing is it all goes back to inflation. All right? So it's all about inflation. So whenever we're talking about nominal GDP, Nominal is our current GDP measured at current market prices. So it's what happens right now, boom, within a vacuum. Now, real GDP, on the other hand, this is measured with a fixed dollar. And this is what we did when we were kind of extrapolating the data with CPI, and we were trying to see what we could forecast, the future cost of all those various goods and services being in later years. We talked about the issues with extrapolation. We're making a lot of assumptions. We're holding a lot of variables constant, but it gives us a good idea of measurement along the way. For AP macroeconomics, and I've got it there at the bottom for you, all right? Real GDP, this is the important one. Make sure that you know, okay, real GDP. Okay? All right, so that right there, that wraps up all of, Module 11. What I want to look at with y'all now is I want to kind of quickly go through Modules 12 and 13, looking at employment and unemployment. All right? This was a pretty straightforward one, and it seemed like most of us were getting it in class. However, I do want to go over it with you, make sure that we're all on the same page. Okay? So, first thing we want to do is we want to figure out how we measure unemployment. And what I've got right here is a very simplified version of what I had us do in class. Okay? And the reason why I had to do that long table in class where you had to go through and subtract all the various groups and then, everything else, I wanted you to understand whenever we look at multiple choice questions, who counts and who does not count within the labor force. And we saw on that warm-up question that we did on Friday that this is a skill that we need to have. We need to make sure that we know that. Okay? But simplifying it down on slide 18, when it comes to measuring unemployment, the first thing we need to look at is the population. All right? And the population is simply the number of people in a country. In the United States, there are roughly 330 million of us living here. Now, the labor force, okay? The labor force is the number of people in a country who are currently classified as either employed or unemployed. All right, employed and unemployed. And in order to be employed, this is both part-time and full-time workers. All right, part-time and full-time workers. And we're going to break this down here on the next slide a little bit more what that means, the difference between it and, how it counts. But if you have a job, whether you work part-time or full-time, you are included within the labor force. Okay? And in the United States, our labor force participation rate is someplace around 66%, which means that roughly 66% of our working age population, those old enough to have a job, are included within the civilian labor force. Okay? And so that actually is a pretty good number. It sounds bad, where's the other third of people? But that also includes in that third that's missing, those who are not counted in the labor force, which we talked about before, and we're going to go into a little bit more on the next slide, but that includes like our military personnel. Okay? So let's go ahead and go to that next slide. And when we look at measuring unemployment, to look at who is employed, we're going to look at anyone that's 16 years or older and currently has a job. Okay, that second sub-bullet is what we talked about in class. It doesn't matter if it's full-time or part-time. If you work at least 1 hour every 2 weeks, you are considered employed by U.S. standards. Okay? You're considered employed by U.S. standards. And so we had that example in class where y'all were all working for me in the factory. And at first when we were learning about the production possibilities curve, I had y'all working and I gave y'all extra hours. Instead of working 40 hours a week, everybody had 15 hours of mandatory overtime. And I was paying you extra, I was compensating you for your time, but we saw that it could lead to an overextended economy. Well, in this case, what's happening is I'm only giving you each 1 hour every 2 weeks. All right? And let's say I'm even more of a jerk and I'm doing it at minimum wage. So you're getting $7.25 an hour every 2 weeks because you're only working 1 hour. That's $14.50 a month before taxes. So really, it's not going to be enough to pay for your bills. You'd be employed, but you would be what an economist would call underemployed. Now, to be unemployed, you have to be someone who's 16 years or older that does not have a job, but you're actively searching for work. Okay? And we talked about the 4 types of unemployment in class, and I'm going to review those with y'all. All right, but that includes anyone frictionally, structurally, cyclically, or seasonally unemployed. Okay? And the way we find our unemployment rate is we look at the number of people who are unemployed divided by the number of people within our labor force. All right? And it's worth noting, I want to point out, that second half of the formula, number of people in the labor force. Make sure that we're talking about, for the unemployment rate, the number of people unemployed divided by the number of people in the labor force, and not dividing by the number of people that are in the population. Okay? That's a common mistake that students will make on the AP exam. Let's say that we've got, 6 million unemployed people and there's 180 million people in the population. Don't do 6 divided by 180. Let's say our labor force is 100, we would do 6 over 100, and that way we could come up with 6%. Because if I take 6 divided by 100, I'll get 0.06, and when I multiply that by 100 to make a percentage, I'll end up with 6%. Okay? Couple of groups not included. We talked about even more in class, but kids, we don't do child labor. It does not include military personnel, all right, because that is considered part of government work. It's not private sector. We said we don't count retired people, and it means retired people who are at home or retired people who are collecting pension and working again. We don't include stay-at-home moms and dads. We don't include full-time students 16 years or older who are not looking for work. If you've got a 40-year-old uncle who sleeps on the couch all day, they won't count because they're not actively searching. All right? And this also includes most of the homeless. And the reason I put most of the homeless is we have to keep in mind that some people are homeless, due to economic hard times. They might have a job, and so they might, still be part of the labor force. But if they don't have a job and they're not actively searching, or if they don't have a job and the job they're performing is not a market transactionable type of a job, it would be considered underground work, they would not be in the labor force then either. Okay? So let's go ahead and real quickly, we're going to look at the 4 types of unemployment. We talked about frictional unemployment. This is in between jobs. This is voluntary. This is good for everybody involved. You leave your job at one location. Let's say you had a job working at a restaurant here in Killeen, and when you go off to college, you leave that job so you can go up and find a new job there. It's good for you because you're moving forward, you're going to a new place, and it's good for society because it's only looked at as a temporary setback. You're not out of a job because of a hard time with the economy. You're out of a job because you chose to leave your current job and be in between jobs. The next type we have is structural unemployment. And this is where you have a wrong set of skills, or the skills you have are just no longer needed. So it could be that, someone dropped out of high school. High school dropouts would have a lack of skills. There's very few jobs available in a modern job market, which they'll take you without having a high school diploma. Okay? Let's say you were a typewriter repair person back in the day. You're not going to really have a high demand for your job skills anymore because the technology is vastly superior to what we had back then. Okay? And what we call this is something called creative destruction. Okay? Creative destruction. And this idea is the notion that as we create new jobs and new innovation, it creates other new types of jobs, but in its wake it will replace older jobs. But society actually views this as a good thing, this creative destruction, because while we're getting rid of old jobs, it's something that's inevitable. It's something that we need to do in order to continue to grow as a capitalist society. Okay? Then we've got the last 2, cyclical and seasonal. Cyclical unemployment is what we call the bad kind. This is what we associate with a downturn in the business cycle. And I would write yourself a note here on the side of slide 21. Okay? Cyclical business cycle. All right? Think back to the business cycle, all those ups and downs that we had over time, right? Whenever we were looking at our business cycle, right? We had all those ups and down points along the way. Whenever we're looking at this recessionary point, or even all the way down in this trough, right? Any unemployment associated with this right here is what we would consider cyclical unemployment. the economy is not doing well, and as a result, an individual lost their job. Now, this is bad for society because we saw, when the unemployment rate goes up, consumers on average have lower wages. Lower wages means we have less overall consumer demand. Less consumer demand leads to less demand inflation, which causes a stagnation inside of the economy. It can actually make the economy shrink, and we don't want that to happen. That's what happens during a recession, is the economy starts to contract or shrink and get smaller. Okay? So we want to try to avoid cyclical unemployment. Seasonal unemployment is extremely straightforward. This is you do not have a job right now because it's simply the wrong time of the year. Okay, there's not a big demand for certain jobs in certain seasons, and so as a result, you lost your job due to no fault of your own. Just simply, the skill set you have is just not needed right now. Okay? Right here, the next slide, on slide 22, this is not something you're going to be tested over. It's something that I showed y'all briefly in class. You can go, if this kind of thing is really interesting to you, if you're a big data person, all right, the BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, all right, they track all of this stuff every single month. All right, they look at all kinds of government data, all the way from unemployment rates to the CPI rates that we looked at. But BLS.gov is where I found this information with the U.S. Department of Labor. But the most recent unemployment rate that we have is from January of 2017. The February numbers will be released sometime in early March. But right now we're currently sitting someplace around 4.8%. And if you think back, we talked about full employment before, and I'm going to get to it some more on the next slide, but we said that full employment is someplace between 4 to 5%. So if we've got 4 to 5% of people in our country without work, it's actually a pretty good number. It means that we're operating at an efficient level. If we were to relate that back to our PPC graph from the very beginning of the course, right? If we were to draw a PPC, we would be operating at a point someplace on this line, okay? Someplace on that line, which is great. That's exactly where we want to be, all right? And so right now, if you ask an economist, how's the economy doing, it's very much a loaded question, but as far as the data suggests, right now we're doing pretty well. Okay, we're on a positive trajectory, and so the biggest thing we'd want to do is make sure we don't screw things up moving forward. All right, so kind of going forward with that idea, all right, full employment, this is what happens when there's no cyclical unemployment present within the economy. Okay, cyclical, we said once more, this is no unemployment due to a downward trend within the economy. All right, so there's nobody without work because the economy is not performing well. And we associate this with the natural rate of unemployment, the NRU. Okay, and another way that you'll see me talk about this, if you want to leave a note on the side, all right, the NRU, let me go back, grab the pen tool. The NRU, all right, another way we'll put that is a lowercase u subscript lowercase n. All right, a lowercase u with a subscript lowercase n. All right, that right there is the same thing as the NRU. So as far as which one to use on the exam, it does not matter. Okay, it's like when we looked, at some of our labels before. This right here, it will not matter if you put NRU versus UN. It's sort of a tomato. Both myself and the graders for College Board will know exactly what you're talking about. Okay. Now, the NRU, the natural rate of unemployment, is the level of unemployment experienced when the economy is producing at its full potential. In other words, whenever we are at maximum efficiency. And we said on the last slide, maximum efficiency on that PPC is when we're operating on the line. And it just so happens that the NRU is equal to about 4 to 5%. So from there, what we can actually conclude then is that full employment is equal to the natural rate of unemployment. All right? And the symbol that we are going to use for full employment is going to be a capital Y subscript F. All right? And so UN is equal to YF and vice versa. If our country is fully employed, we could say that we are operating at the natural rate of unemployment. Or if we were to say, we're operating at the natural rate of unemployment, then, we could also say that we are operating at full employment. All right, and what we're going to end up doing is we're going to link full employment, and right there you'll see I've actually got that written as FE. Okay, and I wanted to kind of point that out. All right, the reason I've got FE right there, and then up here at the top I've got YF, is we're going to see this many different ways. Okay, we actually will also see it. Some of the FRQs that we're going to do, College Board will have us put down as our label YE. All right, for our full employment equilibrium output level. So there's going to be a lot of different labels, a lot of different ways we can put this. Okay, and so don't worry when you start seeing different ways. It's kind of like we talked about a firm as a business, as a producer. It's just more ways of saying the same thing. Okay, but we're going to associate the PPC graph with the long run aggregate supply model and the Phillips curve. All right, so the two graphs that are coming along the way, the aggregate model and the Phillips curve. Okay, aggregate model we're going to start looking at, you're going to start looking at tomorrow on Tuesday in class, or Wednesday in class rather. All right, and then the Phillips curve will be the last graph that we're going to look at in here. Okay, but full employment, natural rate of unemployment, we're talking about the same thing. We're talking about approximately 4 to 5% of the population being without work because they are structurally, seasonally, or frictionally unemployed. Okay, as long as there's no cyclical unemployment, we're at full employment. All right, last thing I want to quickly look at with y'all is, why is unemployment bad? I had talked about Okun's Law with you way back at the beginning of the course, but I think it's worth mentioning again now because we have a better understanding of what GDP is. And what this tells us is that every 1% increase in the unemployment rate will cause a 2% decline in real GDP. And so, just for illustrative purposes, I'm going to jump back to slide 22 with y'all real quick. And so I wanted to look at, back in 2010, right, when unemployment was at 10%. So if our full employment, or if our natural unemployment rate is at 5%, right, and in October of 2010 we had 10%, that means that we were up 5% more than what we needed to have been at. Okay, so if we take Okun's Law for reference, right, where it says every 1% increase in unemployment is a 2% decline in real GDP, we could just set up a simple, distributive property right here and look at, a 5% increase times a 2% decline in real gross domestic product, and we could conclude that we lost about 10% of our real GDP as a result of unemployment climbing. Okay, so really, really, really not a good thing for us to have happen. Okay, so we've got that. Last couple notes is the fact that the burden of unemployment is not equally shared in society. There are certain groups that are going to feel it more than others. If I lose my job, for example, you may be happy, sad, or feel any other kinds of emotions. Hopefully sad, though. But you won't feel the same sort of sadness that I would feel. And, coincidentally, by that same logic, if, heaven forbid, somebody in your family lost their job, I would not be able to experience it the same way you did. And so the burden of unemployment is not equally shared. It causes social unrest, and it's hard on individuals, and it's hard on families. Okay? So that actually concludes what I have for y'all for that set of notes. I do want to real quickly, before I go, look back at Schoology with you. Okay? So I'm going to go back to the internet, and when you go on to Schoology, all right, I'm going to pull up just second periods class because it's the first one that pops up on my list. But everybody, or actually I can even pull it up over here on the side. All right, if you'll look over here, Friday, February 24th, friendly reminder. All right, your Unit 2 exam redo, if you're planning on doing that, is due to me no later than Friday, February 24th at 4:15 p.m. Okay, the Unit 2 exam redo is optional. You do not have to do it. However, it's a great opportunity to try to raise your grade considering the fact that there is no risk associated with it. Okay, I'm going to take the higher of the two grades. Now, the Unit 3 Part 1 exam everybody does need to do. All right, and it's really easy to find. When I go on to Schoology, you'll be able to see it. You can go on Unit 3 Part 1 exam. Okay, whenever you click on it, you'll see on there. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and zoom this in real fast. You're going to get a random question set. All right, and you're not going to know what the questions are beforehand. I'm not going to tell you what they are, but you're going to have to go through and answer those questions. It is an open book test for you. You may use whatever resources you have. Do not collaborate with your peers. If I get any inkling of any collaboration happening, it will not be very good, and we'll lose any opportunity for a repeat of the opportunity to do exams in this manner moving forward, including the test redos this way. Okay, I was trying to make it a little bit easier with the test redos so you could do this more on your own time and not have to worry about it. Scheduling time to come in for tutoring. Still, please come in for tutoring whenever you need help in this class, but I'm just trying to free up some more of your time. I know several of y'all are involved in extracurriculars. Okay? But really, that's that. If you'll look at the top of my website, I've added a link now for Econ YouTube videos, and so you'll be able to actually click there. It's right next to where the macro free response questions are, but you can click there, and it's going to have this video as well as any other videos that I end up making to help review material as we go through. Okay? Hopefully this helps y'all out. Please use the rest of this time wisely. You're going to have a little bit of time left in class. Whatever you need to work on that for me. I really want you to go on and start going home this evening, start looking at those practice problems that are on the front of the website. Okay? Definitely go on the website and check those out. Make sure that you are getting all the practice that you can. Look at the free response questions. This test is not overly difficult. Okay, there's not going to be anything on there that's going to be a surprise. Nothing's going to jump at you that you have not seen before. But by this point, you're starting to figure out what the questions look like on my exams, and so you have a really good idea for how hard you individually need to study. So make sure that you're putting in the right amount of effort for those exams so you can succeed and do well. Okay? If you have any questions, please don't hesitate. Shoot me an email. I'll be happy to answer those for y'all. And I hope y'all have a great rest of y'all's day. And I will see y'all when I return.